This bull refused to eat for 5 days, until a blind man whispered something to him. The sun was setting low over the Texas plains, staining the clouds a deep rust red as it dipped behind the horizon. Dust hung in the air like smoke, unmoving, heavy with the kind of silence that doesn't just settle, it weighs. Inside the barn, the air was thick with the scent of stale hay, dried manure, and something harder to name. Grief. The kind animals feel but can't explain. Samson, the prize bull of Willow Glen Ranch, hadn't touched food in 5 days. He stood in the corner of his stall, motionless, as though carved from onyx. His massive frame, once the envy of county fairs and rodeo circles, now trembled just slightly with each shallow breath. The outline of his ribs was beginning to show under his dark hide. Flies hovered around the untouched feed in the trough, buzzing in lazy loops. Water sat stagnant in a metal bucket that hadn't dipped an inch in days. His eyes, once wild and proud, looked past everything, as if he were somewhere else entirely. Outside his stall, people whispered in clumps. Ranch hands, neighbors, even the local vet. No one wanted to say it out loud, but they all knew. Samson was dying. Not from injury, not from illness, but from something they couldn't reach. Grief. Hector was the only one who could calm him, said Carl, one of the older ranch hands, his voice rough like gravel. He leaned against a post, shaking his head. That bull would have walked through fire if Hector told him to. He tried, murmured Travis, a younger hand with calloused fingers and a nervous edge. That's how he died, remember? They all fell silent. The storm had come out of nowhere 5 nights ago, violent, electric, biblical. Thunder cracked the sky open like a whip, and Samson had panicked, thrashing against the stall, roaring with fear. Hector, his handler for nearly 9 years, had done what no one else dared. He walked straight into the chaos. Just him, a halter rope, and the kind of voice that once soothed wild calves like lullabies. No one knew exactly how it happened, only that there was a sickening crunch, a yell swallowed by the thunder, and then silence. When they pulled Hector's body out from under the shattered stall beam, Samson had already gone still, quiet. And from that moment on, he didn't move, didn't eat, didn't make a sound. Mrs. Lowell stood just inside the barn door, arms crossed tight over her chest. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight knot, her posture rigid, but her face betrayed the worry. She was a woman of land, of labor, not of emotion. But now, even she looked hollowed out. We can't let him suffer, she said quietly to the vet beside her, her voice shaking just enough to betray her steel. If he doesn't eat by tomorrow morning, we do what needs to be done. The vet nodded but said nothing. There wasn't anything left to say. The barn door creaked again, but this time not from wind. A soft tap followed by another. Slow, measured. Everyone turned. From the dark outside stepped a man. Tall, thin, wearing a sun-bleached trench coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His hand held a long wooden cane that clicked gently against the floor as he moved. His eyes, hidden behind dark glasses, scanned nothing. Because they couldn't see. He stopped just past the threshold. The horses in their stalls shifted restlessly. Even Samson's ears twitched, barely, as if some long-forgotten instinct stirred. I heard you had a bull that's quit living, the man said, his voice soft but not weak. He spoke like someone who chose his words carefully, as if each one carried weight. Carl stepped forward, arms out. Barn's closed, friend. You with the vet? The man tilted his head. No, sir. I'm with Hector. Everyone froze. Mrs. Lowell's eyes narrowed. And who exactly are you? The man took a single step forward. The cane clicked once. He removed his hat, revealing gray at his temples, skin weathered from sun and years. Name's Elias, he said. I knew Hector a long time ago, before the ranch, before all this. Carl laughed bitterly. You don't look like no ranch hand. You don't even look like you can find your way to the outhouse, no offense. No offense taken, Elias replied evenly, tapping his cane once more. I just need a minute with the bull. Travis shook his head. He doesn't let anyone near him. He'll gore you where you stand. I'm not asking to touch him, Elias said, turning toward the sound of Samson's stall. I just need to speak to him. Mrs. Lowell looked from Elias to Samson, then back. "You're blind," she said bluntly. "I am," Elias agreed. "And you think he'll listen to you when he won't even look at food?" "I don't know what he'll do," Elias said quietly. "But I owe Hector this, whether it works or not." Silence stretched across the barn again. Outside, the sun had finished its descent, and dusk wrapped the ranch in bruised colors. Finally, Mrs. Lowell stepped aside. "5 minutes," she said. "And if he even twitches wrong, Carl's got a tranquilizer rifle ready." Elias nodded and tapped forward, step by careful step, until he reached the stall. His free hand rose slowly and found the wood beam. He paused there, listening. Inside, Samson didn't move, didn't blink. Elias tilted his head, as if listening to something deeper than sound. Then he whispered. No one could make out the words. They weren't spoken in full sentences, just fragments, a name, a memory, a melody half-hummed, words layered with emotion, like a prayer buried in regret. Samson shifted, not violently, not aggressively, just a shift. A muscle relaxed. One hoof scraped the dirt. Elias's hand gently touched the top rail of the stall, fingers brushing old scratches etched into the wood. "You remember that voice, don't you?" he said softly. "You remember the old stories he used to tell you when you were scared?" The bull's ears twitched again. Elias moved closer. "Remember the scar behind your ear?" he said, the whisper just barely louder than the sound of wind through the boards. "Hector told me how you got it. Showed me once when you were just a calf. You were special. You still are." Samson's head lifted. Outside the stall, not a soul dared breathe. Elias reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded strip of cloth, faded plaid. He held it out, though he couldn't see if the bull was watching. "It was his," he said, "his bandana, the one he wore every day." Samson stepped forward, slowly, muscles quivering. Then, like a miracle, he lowered his head and nudged the cloth. The barn exhaled in shock. Mrs. Lowell covered her mouth. Carl lowered the tranquilizer. Travis blinked hard and looked away. The bull didn't roar, didn't charge, just stood, quiet as a ghost, his head bowed beside the blind man. Elias exhaled, just once. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said softly, folding the bandana again. "If he lets me." He turned to go. As he walked back toward the barn doors, Samson let out one low, rumbling breath. It wasn't a sound of pain. It sounded like mourning, like memory, like the beginning of something trying to live again. Morning on the ranch cracked open with a sky the color of tarnished copper. Dew clung to the dry grass like it didn't belong there. Everything still felt off balance, like nature itself was holding its breath, waiting. The barn, once filled with chatter and life, had grown quieter. Not silent like before. No, this quiet was different. It carried the weight of almosts, almost a miracle, almost too late. Word had already started to spread. By the time Elias arrived the second day, a few more curious eyes had gathered near the fence. Not just ranch hands now, but neighbors. Locals who had known Hector or heard stories about the bull he raised like a son. A few wore hats pulled low to shield against the morning sun, but it didn't hide the skepticism in their faces. "He's the blind guy?" someone muttered. "That him," another said. "Walked straight in like he knew where every nail was." Elias moved through them without reacting. Same long coat, same worn cane, same slow, deliberate pace, each step precise, each footfall echoing on the barn's weathered boards. He didn't scan with his ears or feel his way like someone lost. He moved like a man following memory. Inside, Samson was awake, standing, not pacing, not alert, but no longer frozen. He stared at the stall door as Elias approached, something in his posture wary yet waiting. Mrs. Lowell leaned against the far post, her arms crossed. The worry lines on her face had shifted, less panic now, more questions. She didn't smile when Elias entered, but she nodded once, slow and heavy. "Whatever you did yesterday," she said. "He took a bite of hay. One bite. First food in 5 days." "I know," Elias said simply, stopping just outside the stall. "You coming back again today?" "Yes." She looked at him hard. "I still don't know who you are." "I'm not sure I do either," he replied. And then he stepped into the stall. Carl, arms crossed beside the tack wall, whispered under his breath to Travis, "Watch this. Maybe he'll pull out a flute and charm the beast." Travis smirked, but it was thin. Elias moved through the straw slowly. The air was warmer inside the stall, heavier, like grief still lived there. He reached out, and his hand hovered for a beat, searching, and then gently settled against Samson's shoulder. The bull didn't react. Elias lowered himself to his knees in the straw, settling in beside the giant animal as if he'd done it 1,000 times. His fingers brushed against the bull's hide, then moved slowly, with familiarity, toward the neck, the jawline, the ear. And then he began to speak, not in full sentences, not clearly, barely audible really, more like hums and syllables wrapped in rhythm. His voice had no shape, no clear direction, but it soothed, like water over stone. It wasn't what he said, it was how. Gentle, patient, as if coaxing something not from the outside world, but from inside Samson himself. The onlookers outside the stall had gone quiet. Samson's breathing slowed, not normal, but no longer ragged. His head lowered by inches, nostrils flaring, ears twitching toward the voice. One of Elias's fingers found the ridge behind Samson's left ear. A scar, faded but still there. He let his thumb trace it carefully. "I remember this," he whispered, no longer humming. "Hector showed me once. Said it made you different. Said you were the only one who didn't break when that fence gave way." Samson shifted, his left front hoof dragging softly across the straw. Elias's hand stayed right where it was. Outside the stall, Carl's voice cut the quiet. "I'll be damned." No one shushed him. They didn't have to, because something was changing. Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a small, folded piece of something. Fabric, blue and frayed. The same bandana from the night before. He unfolded it in his lap, smoothing it gently. "You remember this too, don't you?" Elias said. "He always wore it. Had it tied around his neck in every picture." Samson didn't step forward, didn't reach for it, but his eyes locked onto the cloth, and for the first time in nearly a week, there was focus in them. "Tell me you forgive him," Elias said. Not to the bull, not out loud even. It was something more broken, more human, and it hung in the air like smoke. The bull let out a low breath, not a groan, not a growl, just air. Then something quiet happened. His head dipped, not quickly, not with energy, but purposefully. His wide jaw lowered toward the hay trough and he sniffed. The hay was stale, dried from days of neglect, but Samson's teeth found it. One bite. He chewed, slow, methodical. Outside the stall, someone gasped. Carl stepped closer to the gate, mouth open. Travis blinked like he wasn't sure what he'd seen. The rest murmured, unsure of whether they'd just watched a ghost come back to life or something stranger. Elias didn't look up. He simply folded the bandana again, placed it against the rail, and sat with his hand resting lightly on the bull's flank. His breathing matched Samson's, slow, measured, grounded. Mrs. Lowell turned to Carl. "Put the rifle away." He did. After a while, the murmuring picked up again outside the barn, but it was quieter now, respectful. There were no more jokes. Later that afternoon, when the crowd thinned and only the wind whispered through the barn's slats, Travis found Elias seated alone on the edge of the corral fence. He still wore the glasses, but something about him seemed even more distant now, like his body was present, but his mind was someplace years away. "Hey," Travis said cautiously. "I saw what you did. I mean, whatever that was." Elias didn't respond at first. Then he said, "I didn't do anything. Just reminded him of someone." Travis hesitated. "You said you knew Hector, long time ago?" Elias nodded faintly. "What were you to him?" Travis asked. Elias turned his face slightly toward the sound. "Someone he stopped waiting for." The younger man frowned. "You mean, like a friend?" Elias stood slowly, brushing off the dust from his coat. "Something like that." Then he tapped his cane twice and began walking. From inside the barn there was the soft scrape of hooves in the straw. Samson was lying down, not collapsed, not weak, but calm. The hay in the trough was disturbed, not empty, but changed. He had eaten again. The days passed slowly, but with each sunrise, something strange unfolded inside the barn. The stall that had once felt like a tomb now felt like a chapel. Sacred, quiet, yes, but filled with motion, subtle, intentional. Samson, once a statue of grief, was healing. It didn't happen all at once. The changes were small, like footsteps after injury. One morning, his ears perked when Elias entered. Another day, he nudged the water pail and drank for nearly a full minute. A week after that, he took 3 laps around the paddock without needing a lead. The other hand stopped betting on his death and started making room for his return. But while Samson was beginning to live again, the man beside him remained a mystery wrapped in shadow. Elias came every morning at dawn, never stayed past noon, always alone, always dressed the same, dust-colored coat, wide-brimmed hat, and that long wooden cane tapping the ground with eerie precision. He didn't speak to anyone else unless spoken to. And even then, his answers were short, careful, calculated. He refused payment, declined water, never rode in a truck or asked for a ride, walked to and from the barn like the land was guiding him, and he never once explained how he knew Hector. That unsettled Travis most of all. While the others were content with mystery, Travis wasn't built that way. He'd grown up on hard truths and didn't trust things he couldn't track. So he began digging. One night, sitting on the porch of the bunkhouse, he pulled up the county archive on his tablet. He ran Hector's name through the system: birth records, obituaries, employment files. No mention of a brother, no photos of Elias, no blind friend listed in any emergency contacts or hospital reports. Just Hector J. Albright, born 37 years ago in Plano, Texas. Parents deceased, no siblings. Then Travis dug into Elias, searched every Elias he could find in the nearby counties. Nothing matched. No one blind, no one tied to Hector, no known alias. It was like Elias had risen from the ground itself. The next morning, Elias arrived as usual. And as usual, Samson greeted him with a low breath and a gentle nudge. Travis watched from the shadows between the feed shed and the water tank, arms crossed, jaw locked tight. He waited. That evening, after Elias had finished his quiet session in the stall and disappeared back through the pasture gate, Travis followed. He kept low, quiet, sticking to the shadows and brush. The wind had picked up, making the tall grass hiss. The sun had already slipped behind the hills, but there was enough dusk left to paint the sky pale orange and cast long, bleeding shadows. Elias's cane clicked with rhythm, never off-beat, never stumbling. He didn't use a trail, just cut through the ranch like he'd lived there a lifetime. And yet, he never looked back, not even once. At the edge of the ranch, near the old workers' cabins, long abandoned and half swallowed by vines, Elias stopped. He tilted his head slightly as if listening for something. The wind howled once, low and steady. The cane stopped tapping. "I know you're there," Elias said, his voice calm, "and I know what you're thinking." Travis stiffened. He'd been careful, dead silent. He didn't even step on a twig. But somehow, Elias turned slightly toward him, not all the way. Just enough. "You think I'm lying," Elias said, his hands resting on the cane. "Or maybe worse, you think I'm crazy." Travis stepped out slowly from the brush, hands up slightly, not sure if he was apologizing or challenging. "You knew I was behind you? I heard your boots. And I used to sneak up on Hector all the time when we were kids. He was worse at it than you." Travis swallowed. "So you really knew him?" Elias nodded once. "Better than anyone." "Then why aren't you in the records?" Travis asked, stepping closer. "Why didn't Hector ever mention a brother? We've worked with him for years. Never once said a word about family." Elias took off his hat, holding it by the brim. Then slowly, he reached up and removed his glasses. His eyes were pale, milky, clouded over like smoke trapped in glass. But beneath the blindness was something harder to look at. They were wet. "He didn't mention me," Elias said, "because I left him behind." Travis didn't speak, couldn't. The words felt heavier than the wind. "We were twins," Elias continued. "Identical, at least, before I lost my sight." The wind picked up, tossing dust through the trees. A rusty gate creaked somewhere in the distance. "I couldn't handle the ranch life. I hated the noise, the early mornings, the repetition. I wanted out. I chased music, cities, lights. I left him with all the hard stuff, Dad's funeral, the debts, the animals. I left and he stayed. Elias lowered his head. Last time we spoke was 7 years ago. We fought. He said I abandoned the family. I told him he'd never escape that barn. Travis stared, unsure what to say. Elias wiped at his eyes with the cuff of his coat. After the accident that took my sight, I thought about calling. But pride is a hard thing to kill. When I finally got the courage to reach out, he didn't answer. You found out through the papers? Travis asked quietly. Elias nodded. I read his name in the obituary, and something broke inside me. I came here because I needed to say goodbye, and because I thought maybe Samson could still hear him, or feel him. Maybe if I found a way to reach him, I'd find a piece of my brother too. The two men stood in silence. The cicadas had started singing. Somewhere far off, a coyote yipped once, then stopped. Travis looked back toward the barn. You've been good for that bull. Elias shrugged. He's the one doing the work. I'm just the echo. Travis stepped forward and held out his hand. Why don't you come up to the house tomorrow? Eat with us. Sit with Mrs. Lowell. Tell her who you really are. Elias shook his head gently. Not yet. Why not? Because I'm not done saying I'm sorry. He slipped his glasses back on, then turned toward the cabin and tapped forward again. Travis didn't follow. He just stood in the rising dark, thinking of a blind man who walked straighter than most could see, and a bull that seemed to listen to ghosts. The barn was quieter that night than it had been in weeks. Not dead quiet. There was always the soft creak of wooden beams settling under the weight of time, the occasional scuff of hooves in their stalls, or the faint buzz of moths tapping against the hanging lanterns. But there was a stillness to the air, like the building itself had stopped breathing, just for a moment, to listen. Elias knelt once more beside Samson's stall. His coat lay folded beside him this time. The glasses were off. His face, bare in the flickering light, looked older now, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with age. His pale eyes stared straight ahead, unfocused, but filled with something raw. Something he didn't show anyone else. Not Mrs. Lowell, not Travis, not even the bull, just the ghosts. Samson stood only inches away, close enough that Elias could feel his breath. The bull had changed. The listlessness was gone. His body had begun to fill out again. His muscles were tighter, posture more alert. But tonight, he trembled. Something in him buzzed with tension, like memory waking from a long sleep. I wasn't just talking to the bull, Elias whispered, his hand gently resting against the thick hide. I was asking Hector to forgive me. His fingers found the familiar scar behind Samson's left ear, the same one Hector had showed him once, long ago, when they were still brothers who laughed more than they argued, when they still played guitar together on the back porch of their father's house and dared to believe the world would always be kind. But then came the split. The fight had been ugly. Words shouted that couldn't be taken back. Hector had accused him of abandoning their roots. Elias had called Hector small-minded, chained to a dying life. There'd been fists, broken glass. Elias left that night and never turned back. The accident came later. A touring van, rain-slick road, and metal folding around bone. When he woke in the hospital, the world was nothing but shapes and muffled sounds. He never called Hector. He couldn't face him, not blind, not beaten, not broken. Shame sank its teeth in and never let go, until he read the obituary. Elias swallowed thickly and leaned forward. You were the one who stayed, he murmured. The one who bore the weight. I ran. But now, I'm here. I'm sorry I wasn't before. Samson let out a low, steady exhale. Then, slowly, he stepped forward and lowered his massive head until it pressed gently against Elias's chest. The contact knocked the breath from him, not because of the weight, but because of what it meant. The bull was trembling. Deep tremors ran through his frame, as though a dam inside him had cracked. And then, from somewhere deep in his throat, came a sound. It wasn't a snort, not a grunt. It was something wet, guttural, broken. A sob. Elias didn't move. He just closed his hand around the bull's jaw and leaned his forehead against the horn. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Then, something shifted. In the far corner of the barn, where the shadows clung to the beams and the moonlight barely touched, a board creaked. A soft, unmistakable creak. Not from wind. Not from an animal. Elias's head tilted. He went still, every muscle frozen. The hair on his arms stood on end. He turned his head slightly, his pale eyes scanning the darkness. "Hector?" he whispered. The air grew cold. Another board creaked, then silence again. Elias stood slowly, not rushed, not panicked, like a man pulled by gravity toward something familiar. He stepped out of the stall. The bull didn't follow, just watched, eyes wide and unblinking. Elias moved toward the shadows, cane forgotten, hands out in front of him now. His steps were cautious, reverent. The barn door stood open just a crack. Moonlight spilled through in a silver line that barely touched the edge of the tack wall. Elias stopped there, heart hammering. A faint scent hit him. Tobacco. The cheap kind Hector used to roll when they were kids. He whispered again, "If it's you, say something." Behind him, the bull let out a low groan. The lantern near the far stall flickered once, twice, then died. Elias stood in the dark, no wind, no movement. Then, faintly, his ears caught something, a whisper, his name. "Elias?" His knees buckled. He gripped the rail beside him, chest heaving. That voice, it was Hector's, not imagined, not a memory, alive, not in flesh, but there. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. The barn returned to its stillness. The lanterns glowed steady again. The air warmed. Elias turned slowly back toward Samson, his fingers trembling. "Did you hear it?" he whispered. "Was that real?" The bull didn't answer, of course, but he stood straighter now. His eyes were no longer wet, but calm. Elias dropped to his knees in the straw. This time, footsteps echoed behind him. It was Mrs. Lowell. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, holding a small bundle in her hands. "I thought you might still be here," she said gently. "You left this in the feed shed." She handed him an old photo frame. Dusty, worn. Inside was a picture of Hector, laughing beside a young man holding a guitar, his twin. Elias touched the frame like it might vanish. "I remember this day. He dragged me into the barn and said, 'One picture before you go ruin your life.'" Mrs. Lowell smiled faintly. "He never stopped waiting for you to come back." Elias's throat tightened. "I should have come sooner." "Maybe, but you came." She knelt beside him. "There's something else, something he never told anyone. After your accident, he went looking for you, traveled out east, but you were already gone." Elias blinked. "I never knew. He said he heard you were living under a stage name, playing piano in some jazz club in Asheville. He waited 2 nights outside that club, hoping you'd come out." Elias bowed his head, grief slamming into him like a freight train. "I was too ashamed to face him. He forgave you long before you forgave yourself," she said quietly. They sat in silence, listening to the soft breath of the bull and the night whispering through the slats. Elias spoke one last time, barely above a whisper. "Then maybe this wasn't about saving Samson." Mrs. Lowell nodded. "Maybe it was Samson saving you." He stood slowly, hand brushing Samson's shoulder one last time. The bull turned toward him, calm now, strong. At the door, Elias paused. The moonlight stretched across the field outside, pale and endless. He turned back to Mrs. Lowell. "I think I'll stay," he said. She smiled. "We could use a man who knows how to speak without seeing." Elias stepped into the moonlight, the barn behind him no longer a tomb, but a cathedral. And behind him, as the doors creaked shut, the sound of hooves on straw was no longer hollow. It was whole, odd out of reverence, but surrender.